Mother of God, Jacob muttered, pulling off his wide-brimmed hat and mopping at his brow. How the hell can it be so damn hot without a lick of sun? He cast a baleful look at the cloud-ridden sky, which had just begun to pour with rain. Jacob sighed. This is where you bring us, he said to his silent horse, who ignored him, chewing on a browning piece of shrub. 2 weeks in the saddle, you bring us to this shit splat of a place. He looked down at the town surrounded by murky swampland. Still, Jacob knew there was some kind of work for him here. Years ago he had been a small-town preacher, until one dark night something from man's worst nightmares brutally slaughtered his poor wife Jane. But Jacob had his revenge. The very next night, as he sat alone in the ruins of his life, God had spoken to him, showed him through visions of the way the blade, fire, and holy silver. Best of all, God had shown him the whereabouts of the creature that had so callously slaughtered his beloved Jane. Jacob had tracked the beast and cut it down. Since then, he had killed many such things, creatures that lived in shadow and slink through the dark corners of the world. Always on the trail, a gray rider plagued by visions and dreams. Yeah, I guess you dream too. He cracked a smile, patting the big Mustang fondly on its thick neck. Wouldn't be the first time, he said, straightening. God works in mysterious ways, he sighed, nudging the horse forward, insects buzzing all around him as he headed into town. The town itself wasn't much of a town, more of a collection of decrepit-looking huts and an even more decrepit-looking saloon. On a small hillock overlooking the whole mess stood a small church that once might have been made of white board. These were all faded to a weathered gray, many splintered and in desperate need of repair. With a groan, Jacob slid gratefully from his saddle, his dusty boots landing on a wide wooden walkway, clearly designed to keep people from sinking into the surrounding swamp mud. Some of the denizens gave Jacob wary glances, their eyes falling to the big revolvers slung low on his narrow hips. Afternoon, ma'am, Jacob said as he passed a black woman, who promptly ignored him, dragging her 2 screaming brats behind her. Hell, got ourselves a real mix here, Jacob murmured, noticing both white and black folks mingling. He smiled. It had been 2 years since the end of the Civil War. Could it be that even here, in the sweltering air of the Louisiana swamp, folks were learning to get along? Jacob doubted it. The overall picture of the place was one of poverty, and that particular son of a bitch didn't seem to care about the color of your skin. It would screw you over, one way or the other. Banging the trail dust from his long duster coat, he tied his horse to the hitching post and wandered into the saloon, pushing easily through the swinging batwing doors. A few people turned to face him before going back to their drinking and gambling. Jacob paid them no mind, sauntering over to the rough wooden bar and leaning heavily, wiping at his brow once again. "Barkeep," he called to a heavy, mustachioed man who hurried over, a dirty towel slung over his rounded shoulders. "Tell me you got something cold in this damn place." "Well, we got piss-warm beer or whiskey. Take your pick, mister." "Figures," Jacob growled, slamming his money down. "Yes, piss-warm beer'll have to do." Grinning through nicotine-stained teeth, the man poured one off for Jacob, cutting the foam with a straight razor. Jacob took a long drink. The beer was piss-warm, as promised, but at least it wasn't flat. "Got any kind of food?" he asked, and beginning to fix himself a smoke with long, nimble fingers. "Maybe a room for a couple of nights." Sure. I'd fix you up a plate of beans cooked in the best molasses," Barkeep said, nodding towards a small, steaming pot at the other end of the bar. "We ain't got any rooms. Bessie's got a bunkhouse a little down the street. She'll rent your room. Rats come free of charge." He chuckled. "I don't mind rats," Jacob said, giving the man a hard look. "Most of the time, they're more agreeable than people." The man withered under the starkness of those blue eyes and hurried off to fetch Jacob his beans. He had just finished his meal, eating right there at the bar, when a giant of a man came barging through the door. "Got the better of one of them sons of bitches," the big man hollered. Blood covered his buckskin jacket, and it looked like he had a large, wet-looking gator hide slung over one massive shoulder, which was unceremoniously threw into a corner, making 2 men playing dominoes cry out and scatter, The big man laughed uproariously and stomped over to the bar, slapping Jacob's back hard enough to make his teeth rattle, spilling a goodish amount of beer down the front of his shirt. "Son of a bitch," Jacob cursed, wiping himself down. The big man didn't hear him. He stank like a polecat and reeked of moonshine. "Billy, you scrawny redneck, give me a plate of them beans you're so proud of. Make sure you fill that plate up." He bawled at the barkeep, who jumped as if something had bitten him on the ass and hurried away, frantically slopping beans into a tin plate and gingerly setting it down before the big trapper. "Go on, get," the big man said, waving the other man away before starting on his beans. The man's chewing and slobbering started to play on Jacob's nerves, and he picked up what was left of his beer and started away. Just then a filthy hand wrapped around his sleeve, pulling him to a halt. "You got a problem with my company?" the big man said through a mouthful of beans. Jacob tried to pull himself free, but the other man grinned and doubled down on his grip. "Mister, I've been in a real bad mood for about 10 years now, and I think your hand just ran away from that thick head of yours." Hearing this, the big man's mouth dropped open, and he dragged Jacob over towards him, sending his plate flying as he raised a massive fist. Jacob didn't hesitate. He brought his beer glass crashing down, smashing into the other man's face in an explosion of glass and blood. Screeching and pawing at his bloody face, the man loosened his grip, and Jacob wrenched himself free before kicking him square in the balls. The man doubled over, lost in pain. Jacob half kicked, half pushed him out of the batwing doors and into whatever passed as a street, and then followed on after him. The man lay on his back, cradling his swelling balls. Seeing Jacob, his eyes filled with rage, his free hand scrambled towards his gun. Quickly, Jacob threw back his old duster, revealing the big revolver on his hip. "Don't do it, mister. Ain't worth dying over a small disagreement." For a moment, the man's hand dropped away, but in the end, his pride won. He drew down on Jacob, his gun barely clearing its holster before Jacob drew, fired, and reholstered, leaving a smoking hole in the now dead man's head. "Jesus," a scrawny-looking man in a straw hat and coveralls said. "You killed Big John. You shot him down dead in the street." "I warned him. Better go fetch the sheriff," Jacob said, eyeing the growing crowd. If there was any talk of a lynching, there'd be a lot of dead people before they got a rope around Jacob's neck. "I'm afraid we don't have a sheriff," the tall man said, stepping from the crowd. He was dressed in priest's vestment, a Roman collar around his neck. "Suppose you can call me the leader here in town, spiritually, if nothing else. Matthew, Timothy, if you'd be so good as to get a burial party for Big John. He was a big fool and a bully, but he was a Christian, and we'll bury him in the churchyard, undeserving as he was." The two men nodded and hurried away as the tall man approached. "My name's Delaney, Father Delaney. St. Michael's," he said, nodding towards the small church. "You're a stranger in town." It's more of a statement than a question, but Jacob answered him anyway. "Name's Jacob Masterson, and that was, legal shooting." "Killing another man is against God's laws," the priest retorted. "From what I know of God," Jacob replied, "he's a bloodthirsty son of a bitch, and I'm bled in his name more than once." The priest seemed to consider this. "I suppose a God who let his only son bleed on a cross probably cares little about you and me. Still, we serve his will as best we can until he calls us home to glory." "Yeah, well, I don't plan on going home to glory just yet. That fool have any kin I should worry about?" The priest actually laughed. "He has a brother who's probably shake his head for what you've done. John wasn't loved by the town folk. I don't think you'll have much of a problem. You'll probably drink for free. That is, if you're planning to stay." "I have my business here in town." "Well, why don't you come up by the presbytery? You can wash, have a good meal. Tell me about it." "My business is my own," Jacob replied, then immediately felt a flush of shame. He spent too long alone on the trail and wasn't used to people, as he once had been. "I'm sorry, Father," he smiled, "but you wouldn't believe me if I told you I'm about God business, if that soothes you in any way." The priest shrugged. "My offer stands. I'll be happy for the company. And not to be rude, but you really are in need of a wash. Smell like a horse and gunpowder." Jacob laughed at the other man's prissy expression. "All right, Padre. Lead on, then." The presbytery was small but comfortable. Jacob had washed and now sat in a cozy little kitchen nook, a steaming bowl of soup before him. The padre sat on the opposite side of the table, sipping coffee and seemingly deep in thought. Just as Jacob finished his soup, the priest began to speak. "Now you look like a man who's ridden far and seen much, Jacob Masterson. Now the way you shot down Big John was fast. Almost unbelievably fast. Swear I've never seen anything quite like it." "Seen many gunfights, have you, Padre?" Jacob said, putting down his spoon and sighing contentedly. The other man shrugged. "I've seen my fair share of violence and death. In the war, a terrible thing that. Brother fighting against brother." Jacob nodded. "But it was for a good cause, eh, Padre?" "Oh, yes." The priest nodded. "Look out the window, Mr. Masterson. What do you see?" Jacob didn't bother. "I see a swamp. Few wooden houses, saloon, merchants, not much else." "You would wonder why there's a town in such a place like this." Jacob shrugged. "Wouldn't necessarily call this place a town. A wide place in the road, maybe." The priest chuckled at that. "But why is there a road here in the first place?" Jacob sighed. "Why are you dancing around so much? You got something to tell me, then just tell me. I'm not a man known for patience." "Very well. The town wasn't always a town. It was a slave quarter. When the slaves were emancipated, some of them stayed here. Hell, they had nowhere else to go. And by then, the evil of the Beauregard family had been wiped from the face of the earth." "Beauregard family?" Jacob asked, rolling himself a smoke. He offered his making to the priest, who declined with a shake of his head before continuing. "Yes, the Beauregard family. The plantation owners, who left of their plantation houses just over the next bluff. They were paupers, loggers. They even managed to drain some of the swamp, leaving behind fertile lands on which they grew tobacco and some cotton. This was some 30 years ago, you understand." Jacob nodded and lit up his smoke, saying nothing. There was a story here, and Jacob was keen to hear it. Master of the plantation was Benjamin Beauregard, hard, vulgar man, only ever seemed to be kept in check by his gentle wife, a great lady from Georgia who bore him 2 sons. Unfortunately, she died in childbirth in her 22nd year. The daughter she was growing inside her never even took a single breath. She was buried on the grounds of the plantation. Seemingly in his grief, Benjamin went quite mad. He was always a hard man, but after his wife passed, he took his wrath out on his slaves. The women especially got a lot of unwanted attention. One girl in particular took his fancy and soon found herself burdened with her master's bastard child. Her mother, outraged, marched her up to the big house to confront their drunken master. That was her first mistake, and her last. Outraged, Benjamin Beauregard, or so the story goes, strangled the poor girl to death and beat the mother within an inch of her life before his overseer managed to drag him away. "You know their names?" Jacob interrupted. The other man smiled. "That was before my time, to be honest. It's a kind of local legend, along with the curse." "Curse? What curse?" "If I may be permitted to continue?" "Then it'll all become a little clearer to you, Mr. Masterson." Sighing, knowing the priest wouldn't be hurried along, Jacob settled back more comfortably in his seat as the man picked up the thread of the story. "As I was saying, the poor girl had been murdered along with her unborn child. Her mother, half dead and crazed with grief, managed to drag her daughter all the way back to the slave quarter. But according to legend, the horror of that day would be eclipsed by the horror conjured that night. The girl's mother came from a long line of magic users. Making a sacrifice of her own daughter's poor, beaten body and infusing it with her rage and heartache, she finished the ritual by slicing open her own throat. The rest of the quarter cowered in fear as the sky broke open in a terrible deluge. Thunder boomed, lightning flashed, and for a moment, the whole swamp seemed to heave and bubble, before a deafening silence fell over the place. The next day, Overseer Daniels came down from the big house and took the bodies away, dumping them both unceremoniously into the swamp, food for the lurking alligators. 2 days later, while overseeing a logging crew, one of those same alligators dragged Daniels screaming to his death. That was the official report anyway, but rumors had already begun to spread around the quarter. Whispers of a dark presence in the swamp, Rats had been seen fleeing in droves, and the bodies of coyotes and muskrats were found with strange bite marks on their torn and battered flesh. Less than a few months later, both Benjamin's sons were dead. One died in a riding accident thrown from a startled horse with his neck broken. The youngest, prone to sleepwalking, was found drowned in the very edge of Deep Mire Swamp. As for the master of the plantation, his death came less than 6 months later. He was found in his own bed. The official verdict was a heart attack, probably brought on by the strain and heartache of losing his wife and sons. But there was a rumor amongst the house slaves. Talk of a strange substance found on the stairs leading to the master's quarter. Benjamin Beauregard's sheets had been covered in swamp mud. A look of terror stamped across his pale, dead, screaming face. With the death of Benjamin Beauregard, these strange occurrences seemingly stopped. The horror was lost in the greater terror of the war, but now a new Beauregard was occupying that house, a distant relative with some kind of claim upon the land, and people are suddenly starting to go missing again. Bodies have been found floating face down in the swamp, covered in strange markings. The priest stopped there and looked at Jacob, who sat back heavily in his chair. Jesus. That's some kind of story there, Padre. But you mentioned other people going missing and bodies? The other man nodded. Yeah, 2 so far. Both of them were known trappers, found near the heart of the swamp. They were both completely naked, torn open from throat to sternum. Their insides were gone, but it was the marks on their backs that no one could fathom. Great, circular welts, as if something had latched onto them. You're lucky to have found them. What with the alligators and all? Jacob interrupted. See, that's another strange thing, the priest mused, looking out the window. I haven't seen a single alligator since this new Beauregard arrived. Usually you can hear them all night, barking and growling at each other, but the nights have been deathly silent as of late, as if the whole swamp's been silenced by some terrible fear. Could it be some kind of coincidence, all this? Jacob mused. Could it be that Benjamin's son really died by accident? He himself had a heart attack. Stories come twisted over the decades, eventually turned into legends. I mean, there's no real hard proof of any of this. But as soon as the words left Jacob's mouth, he knew he was wrong. Like many times before, God had drawn him to this place, which meant there was something in all this. Something God wanted him to do. Perhaps, the priest said thoughtfully. But only yesterday, the new lord of the manor, Jason Beauregard, came to see me. There have been strange goings-on over at the plantation house. Where there was once tobacco, they now keep sheep, fed cows, and they're starting to show up dead, some torn to pieces, others with the same strange marks around their necks. There have also been markings left on surrounding cypress trees, ones that hem the outskirts of the plantation. All right, then, Jacob said. I'll take a ride out there, see what I can see. That's what all this talk's about, after all, ain't it? The priest shrugged. I don't know if anyone can help, but I feel like there's something about you, Mr. Masterson. Like you coming here was ordained. Yeah, ordained, all right. Dragged from pillar to fuck post, Jacob muttered grumpily, slamming his wide-brimmed hat back into place. Thank you for the victuals, Padre, but I guess I'd best be on my way. Then go with God, the priest said, making the sign of the cross. Yeah, you too, Father. Jacob replied, opening the door and stepping back outside into the Louisiana heat. The plantation house was closer than Jacob expected, literally over the next bluff, where he now sat astride his horse, looking down into a small, fertile valley below. The house was small for one of its kind, surrounded on all sides by green, swaying fields, much of them taken up by sheep and cattle. The house itself had seen better days. The roof sagged, and the paint was peeling, yet even now the signs of restoration were visible. Wooden scaffolding had been erected along one side of the building, and part of the roof looked like it had already begun to be reshingled. Just then a cry of alarm rang out, and 2 men ran towards the barn. Moments later, they came galloping straight towards Jacob, rifles drawn. Jacob let them come. keeping his hands in plain sight and fixed firmly on his reins. The two men slowed and drew up in front of him, their horses blocking his path. "What do you want here, mister?" the smaller of the two men asked. He was weasel-thin, his chin poking out aggressively. Jacob was tempted to tell him to go to hell and reined in his temper. "Howdy, friend. Name's Jacob Masterson," he said with a smile. "Come to speak with Jason Beauregard." "You got an appointment?" The other man spoke up. He was a big, tough-looking cowboy with arms that bulged under his cranberry work shirt. He was also now loosely pointing his rifle in Jacob's direction. "You want to lower that rifle, friend," Jacob growled, "before it gets you in trouble." The man took a long look into Jacob's eyes and must have seen something there he didn't like. He didn't exactly put the rifle away, but he did lower it somewhat. That was something, at least. "Now to answer your question, no, I don't have an appointment. I'm here on behalf of Father Delaney, says you got some trouble I might be able to help with. And I'll tell you something else, it's too goddamn hot to be out here yammering in the sun with the hired help. To be honest, this whole stinking swamp's making me feel testy as a rattlesnake with shingles, so I suggest you move out of the way or I'll move you. Make your choice." His hand dropped towards his gun belt. The smaller man snickered. "You think you're fast enough to take us both on?" "Shut up, Seamus," the big man interjected. "I heard there's been a killing in town today. It wouldn't have anything to do with you now, would it?" he said, eyeing Jacob nervously. "Yeah," Jacob said, "and I ain't ashamed of it. Fool turned a disagreement into a gunfight and lost. Gave him a chance. Same choice you're giving us now," the other man retorted. Jacob sighed. "Look, mister, I'm here to help, nothing more." The big man thought on it for a moment, and Jacob swore he could almost hear the cogs turning and clashing in his head. "All right, then. Follow us down to the big house. If Mr. Beauregard don't want to speak to you, you leave. No fussing. Agreed?" Jacob spat in the dirt. "Agreed. Lead on." Jason Beauregard had just stepped out onto the porch as Jacob and the two men hitched up their horses. The thinner of the two men ran over to his employer in an almost comical bow-legged stride. Moments later, he returned, mopping at his brow. "Mr. Beauregard will see you now," he said loftily. "Well, ain't I the lucky one?" Jacob muttered, strolling past the other man, who had to scurry to get out of his way. The man who greeted Jacob was tall and lean, with a sparse ginger beard, but his grip was firm as he snatched up Jacob's hand and pumped it enthusiastically. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Masterson. I hear from Seamus that Father Delaney thinks you may be able to help us with this problem of ours." Jacob noticed the other man's smile was somewhat strained, and he had large, dark circles under his eyes. The overall effect was of a man under enormous strain, trying to make the best of a bad situation. Jason Beauregard ignored Jacob's scrutiny, but took him gently by the shoulder. "Come, Mr. Masterson. You're most welcome here. Let's sit on the porch a while out of the sun. Have some iced tea or maybe a little bourbon, if you fancy." "Never could resist a good bourbon," Jacob smiled, removing his hat as they both took a seat in the shade. Not that it felt much cooler as Jacob. After they were both settled to their liking, Jason Beauregard began. "You have obviously been told about the sins of my ancestors, the so-called curse that was laid upon them." Jacob nodded, enjoying the cool feel of the iced glass in his hand. "Father Delaney told me the whole mess." "And do you believe in this curse?" Beauregard asked, leaning eagerly forward. "Mister, I've rode hard and seen all manner of evil in this world. Most of it came from plain old men. The devil don't need too many monsters when he has all of mankind fucking one another over on a daily basis. Still, such things do exist. I've seen them with my own eyes. Sent more than a few of them back to hell. So if you're asking me, do I believe in your curse? Yes, I do. I was a preacher once, something I'd been trying hard to forget. But God ain't done with me yet, and he has a tendency to send me about his business. I believe he sent me here to do his work. God commands, and I bleed. Seems to be the rough shot of it." He barked a harsh laugh, throwing back the rest of his drink. "Well, there's been plenty of bleeding on this ranch of late," Beauregard sighed. "And if you really want to help, maybe a picture is worth 1,000 words. Please, follow me, Mr. Masterson." Jacob did as he was bid, stepping off the porch. The two men walked past the side of the house, both unconsciously keeping to the shade. It was heading towards dusk now, and Jacob could smell honeysuckle and jasmine perfuming the air as the insects droned with a kind of insane intensity. "In here," Beauregard said, opening the door of a big red barn. As soon as the door opened, the smell of carrion meat enveloped both men, almost eye-watering in its intensity. "Jesus," Jacob cursed, looking at the pile of dead pigs and sheep stacked against the barn's wooden walls. "About $200 worth of damage so far," Beauregard sighed. But Jacob hardly heard him. He knelt down by one of the bodies. The pig had been completely eviscerated, hollowed out. But it was large, circular welts across its back, both deep and bloody, that intrigued Jacob. "You ever seen anything like this mark before?" he asked. Beauregard hesitated a moment before answering. "Well, when I was a boy, my father, God rest his soul, used to read me stories. The Greek adventures and tragedies were part of my education, you understand. In one book, there was a picture of a creature called a kraken. It had these tentacle-like arms." "Like a devilfish," Jacob said, standing up and brushing down his jean-clad legs. "Yeah, like a devilfish, or an octopus if you like." "And that'd have to be one hell of an octopus. Kill a full-grown pig." "And so the mystery deepens," Beauregard sighed. "And still, there's more to see. Please, follow Jacob. You don't mind if I call you Jacob, do you? And you may call me Jason." "Seems fair," Jacob said, hurrying to catch up with Beauregard, who was back outside brushing his motes from his hair. They walked for some time across a recently plowed field that turned muddy as they entered the shade of the cypress trees bordering the surrounding swamp. "Look here," Jason said, placing his hand on the coarse bark of a nearby tree. Jacob drew nearer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A symbol had been carved deeply into the trunk of the tree. The motif was of an hourglass surrounded by a grinning skull. The whole mess had been splashed with a dark substance that could only be drying blood. "Death magic," Jacob hissed. "So you've seen it before?" Beauregard gasped. Jacob nodded. "Ain't much I ain't seen at this point. Could be voodoo or something similar." "So, what do we do about it?" Jason asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "I ain't sure yet," Jacob said, rubbing at the scratchy stubble on his chin. "There's more than the spirits at play here. Something's tearing up your livestock, and I want to see what it is. With your permission, I'll stay here a few nights, walk the ground, beat the bounds, see if I can't catch this thing in the act." "I hope you can," Jason let out a trembling sigh. "Whatever it is. It's getting closer to the house each night, and another one of my animals dies. At first, it was the pigs that were closer to the swamp, then the sheep in the pasture. Last night, one of the cattle we keep close to the house. Whatever this thing is, it's closing in on me, Jacob. I can feel it. I swear to God I can." "Easy, take her easy," Jacob said, putting a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "I'll be here tonight, and then we'll see what we see." Darkness came swiftly to the swamp, night falling like a shroud. Jacob had eaten a rich meal in the big house, but the good food was overshadowed by an ever-growing sense of dread. As the sky darkened, his host became more agitated until, at last, he left the table and locked himself in his rooms. Jacob sat a moment longer, finishing his smoke before heading outside. He grabbed his rifle and filled a nearby lantern with oil. Some of the other men also walked the fields that night, drafted by Jacob, with Beauregard's permission to help beat the bounds. It was in the early morning hours, maybe a couple past midnight, when a scream suddenly rang out, followed by gunfire. Jacob was instantly alert and came on the run, heading towards the back of the house. Another shot rang out, followed by an ear-piercing scream. Breathing hard, running full tilt, Jacob entered a nearby field, this one overgrown with tall grass and sumac bushes. In the lamplight, he saw a trail of freshly spilled blood. Followed it, eyes alert for the slightest movement. Still, when the attack came, it took him completely by surprise. Something large and hulking suddenly rose above him. With a cry, he raised his rifle but couldn't get off a shot before he was thrown backwards, something wet and hard slamming him down with a teeth-rattling thud. That's when he saw the dead man. Eyes wide with terror, jaw wrenched open in a silent scream. As Jacob watched in horror, trying to catch his breath, a tentacle covered in grasping suckers wrapped around the dead man's ankle and began to drag him away. "No, you fucking don't!" Jacob gritted his teeth. Ignoring the pain in his side, he began to chase the shadow-drenched figure. He had lost his rifle in the fray, so he drew his revolver, barking off shot after shot of blessed silver. But the creature never slowed, though it let out a cry of pain when one shot found its mark. There came a sudden loud splash, and Jacob let out a yell of surprise as his boots sank into the muddy water. The creature was gone. Only the murky swamp waters remained. "Fuck!" Jacob cursed in frustration. He fired shot after shot into the dark water, until his revolver clicked empty. Quickly he reloaded, his nimble fingers going through the old ritual before holstering his gun and heading back the way he came. He studied the flattened grass. "There," he muttered, kneeling down, his lamplight illuminating a black viscous fluid and an empty shell casing nearby. With one gloved hand, he rubbed the substance between his fingers and raised it towards his face. A grim smile flashed across his rough features. "So you bleed. If you bleed," he whispered, "I can kill you, you son of a whore." He turned, and he headed back towards the big house, the moon on his back. When he returned, the house was alive with activity. The men had all retreated inside, and the place seemed to burn with light. Jacob had barely stepped into the porch before Beauregard was there. "What the hell happened out there, Jacob? What do you see?" "Something," Jacob said, sitting down heavily on the porch, gingerly cradling his bruised ribs. "Are you hurt?" Beauregard asked, kneeling beside him. Jacob waved him away. "I've had worse. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself. I saw it, or some of it anyway. Too dark to make out, but it was big and fast. It took one of your men and retreated to the swamp. It's a haven, refuge. It's where it hides. We need to draw it out. It bleeds, feels pain. I tend to get on an equal amount of both from that son of a bitch. And you're gonna help me." "Me?" Beauregard said, not liking the look in Jacob's eye. "What do you mean?" Jacob smiled. "You'll see, Jason. You'll see." After a restless night's sleep, Jacob gathered what remained of the men. Some had fled in the night, overcome by fear. Not that Jacob blamed them. There was bloody work ahead. By mid-morning, Jacob had set the men to task. One crew began digging a large square hole in the field closest to the swamp, while others cut down thick branches. Jacob himself sat shirtless, a large bowie knife in hand, sharpening the branches into staves. Jason Beauregard sat nearby, a large whiskey in hand, trying not to look at the scars on Jacob's lean, hard torso. He would need to be pretty drunk for what Masterson was suggesting. He'd need to be very drunk indeed. By sundown, Beauregard had started to get uppity. The man had been drinking hard all day, his fear compounded by liquor. First, Jacob tried to convince him, then cudgel him, but Beauregard wasn't having any of it. He even went so far as to threaten to shoot Jacob if he didn't get off his damn property. In the end, Jacob simply slugged him in the chin and staked him out in the middle of the field. Some of the men argued, but Jacob silenced them with a look. They soon decided they wanted no part in the business and left abruptly. Not that it bothered Jacob. More men might only have startled the creature, and now, as night truly fell, the hunt was on. Jacob lay in the tall grass for hours, the full moon lighting the cypress trees and their hanging moss. An hour earlier, Beauregard had begun to groan. Now he was fully awake and screaming his head off. That was good. If Jacob felt any guilt, he'd already buried it deep. The man had agreed to the plan and given his word. A belly full of whiskey and a load in his drawers didn't change the fact. At least, not to Jacob Masterson. Another hour passed. Beauregard had finished his hollering and now stood tied to the post, mumbling what sounded like the Lord's Prayer over and over. And then, all of a sudden, he let out an ear-piercing shriek as something rushed towards him through the darkness, something large and dripping with foul-smelling water. Jacob didn't move or draw his weapon, though he was poised to strike at any moment. Legs coiled beneath him, heart pounding, breath coming in sharp bursts, a countdown to violence about to erupt. Then came a resounding crash. The creature let out a cry of anguish and enraged screeching. With a shout of triumph, Jacob rushed to the concealed pit. The creature was down there, thrashing, impaled on multiple spikes, its black ink-like blood gushing forth. "Holy Jesus," Jacob whispered, taking in its terrible form. The top half of the thing resembled a woman, her skin the color of dark molasses, but her lower body was a mass of leprous tentacles that thrashed and heaved as she fought to free herself. As she saw Jacob, she looked up at him with hate-filled eyes. Her hands reached towards him. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, nor the children for their fathers. Everyone shall be put to death of their own sin, Jacob muttered. With that said, he cast down his kerosene lamp into the creature below. Flames enveloped the screaming beast, doing their grisly work. No, please! Jacob spun around only to see Beauregard torn from the stake he had been tied to. There was another one of them, this one much smaller, but with the same coloring and features as the first. Mother and daughter, Jacob gasped, remembering Delaney's story, cast into the swamp together. Jacob drew his revolver, lightning fast as the creature's tentacles wrapped around Beauregard's neck, pulling tight. His eyes began to bulge. Mine! The creature hissed through needle-like teeth, its eyes blazing with triumph. Jacob barked off a single shot, snuffing out one of those eyes in an explosion of jelly-like gore. The creature fell backward but did not release its terrible grip on Beauregard, whose face was now turning black, his quivering tongue protruding from froth-covered lips. Cursing, Jacob holstered his pistol, drew his large bone-handled knife, and leapt upon the writhing mass, desperately sawing at the creature's tentacle-like arm, trying frantically to get Jason Beauregard free. The creature howled in pain, beat at Jacob with its foul, stinking limbs. He felt the suckers piercing his skin, tearing through his clothes, and the smell of his own blood began to perfume the air. In a welter of black blood, he finally managed to tear Jason free and kick the coughing, gagging man away, just as the creature latched onto him, biting deep into his shoulder. In pain and desperation, Jacob rolled on the ground, thrusting his knife into the thing's writhing mass over and over, and then he was falling. A pain that seemed to fill the world sheared into his leg, and he found himself surrounded by burning flames. He was in the pit. The creature had taken the worst of the fall. Pierced in multiple places, it began to burn, screaming long and loud. With a cry of agony, Jacob, driven by adrenaline and fear, pulled his lower leg free of the wooden spike and lunged upwards, his back beginning to burn. Suddenly, Beauregard was there, helping him out of the pit. Jacob rolled in the long grass, tearing at his smoking shirt, before collapsing onto his back. The last thing he saw was the moon sailing overhead, and the screams of the damned followed him down into darkness. Jacob stayed at that ranch for nearly a month while his injuries healed. His leg needed multiple stitches, and for the rest of his life he would carry a small limp, especially when the weather turned cold. As for his back, it had been a mass of blisters, another set of scars to add to the many. And yet, by the grace of God, he recovered quickly. Now he sat astride his horse. He had made his farewells to Jason Beauregard, though the man's final words still rang in his ears. I don't know if you're a good man or a bad man, Jacob Masterson. But you're one tough son of a whore. Jacob didn't know if good or bad played a hand in it. All he did know was that God had not removed the cup from his own son's lips. So what chance did an old broken cowboy like himself stand? He sighed and looked towards the heavens. Thy will be done, he whispered, before heading west. A pale rider on a gray horse. Hey, did you like that Creepypasta story that you heard today? I bet you did, because you stuck around to hear the outro. So, if you want to find more Creepypasta stories like this, check out the links in the description down below that lead you over to the Creepypasta Collection, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 and Volume 2 also have a bunch of stories from some of the best authors I've worked with in the past 15 years, which I think is pretty high praise, seeing as it's like, 4,000 stories? That's right, 4,000 stories. Subscribe, you'll see them. But yes, 2 books available, Amazon, link down below, check them out. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody on this list of Patreons. Some of these amazing folks are Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna Crow, Caltuna, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CrusaderChocobo, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, HIDive
Matthew, Himbo Jerry, Our Minute Seconds Time, Ingegerd Solstrom, Jay Kearns, Jadis Pet, McMog, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Psychomel, Plant Piz, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samara Lynn, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Tolly Sue, Team Leo 76, The Demented Voice in Your Head, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, Your Bro Keegan, Zabub, and Shadow Gardens. A huge thank you to you guys, everybody who shows up in the description down below, and as always, folks, sweet dreams.